The lantern shook in Mary's hand as she pressed her back against the cold clay wall, and for the first time in her 16 years, she wished with her whole chest that she could scream. Behind a curtain of woven reeds, stacked from floor to ceiling, sat sacks upon sacks of golden grain, enough to feed every hungry child in the village through 3 dry seasons. Grain that was supposed to be gone. Grain the elders had sworn no longer existed. Her heart slammed against her ribs as footsteps echoed down the passage toward her. Unhurried, confident. The footsteps of men who had never once imagined anyone would find this place. Least of all, a girl the whole village believed could not speak a single word. If they found her here, no story she told with her hands would save her, because a mute girl's silence would simply be called guilt. She held her breath until her lungs burned, watched 2 shadows stretch long across the chamber floor, and understood that she now carried a secret heavy enough to break the whole village apart. She did not know yet how the story would end, but you should. Months later, under the wide open sky of the harvest square, the very people who had once looked past her, who had spoken freely in front of her as though she were no more than furniture, would lift her onto their shoulders and chant her name until her father wept with pride. An old man named Samuel would stand before the whole village, hold up a row of small clay figures no taller than a finger, and declare that the girl everyone had underestimated was the only soul in Colon brave enough to tell the truth. That moment is coming, and it is worth the journey to reach it. So stay with me to the end, and if stories like hers move you, consider staying subscribed so you never miss the next one. But to understand how a girl with no voice brought down the men who lied for a living, we have to go back to the very beginning of Mary's quiet life. Mary was born in the rainy season in a small mud brick home at the edge of Colon, a village so famous for the deep red clay along its riverbank that outsiders simply called it the Clay Village. Her father, Thomas, was a potter, as his father had been before him, and her mother, Grace, sold vegetables at the market to stretch what little the pottery brought in. From the moment Mary was born, something about her was different. She cried when hungry and laughed when tickled, but she never spoke, not one word, not even the small stumbling sounds other babies made before real language arrived. The village healer examined her throat and found nothing wrong, nothing broken that medicine could name. Grace wept the first time she understood her daughter might never call her mother aloud. And Thomas, though he said little about his own grief, began carving small toys for Mary out of leftover clay, as though shapes might somehow reach her, where words could not. They were poor by any measure, but Mary grew up rich in a different way. She spent her childhood beside her father's wheel, watching his hands turn shapeless clay into water jars, cooking pots, and market bowls. And somewhere in that quiet apprenticeship, she discovered her own gift. Where other children sibbled in the dirt with sticks, Mary shaped tiny figures, no bigger than a thumb, that captured exactly what she felt. A hunched old woman meant sadness. A bird with open wings meant freedom. 2 hands pressed together meant a promise. Long before anyone realized it, Mary had built herself a language, one made of fired clay instead of sound, and the only person who ever truly learned to read it was a boy named David, a fisherman's son who lived 2 houses down and refused to treat her the way the rest of the village did. Most people in Colon were kind enough to Mary in passing, but kindness and respect are not always the same thing. Grown men and women spoke around her the way they might speak around a sleeping dog, forgetting, or simply not caring, that she understood every word. "The mute girl won't repeat it," they would say to one another with a laugh. Not unkindly, just carelessly, the way people speak when they believe no consequence could ever follow. And so, without ever meaning to become one, Mary slowly became something rare and dangerous in Colon. A keeper of secrets nobody knew they had given away. Colon had once been a proud, well-fed village, largely because of a system put in place 2 generations earlier, a shared harvest fund that every family contributed grain to after each planting season. In good years, the fund fed the village through the dry months. In hard years, it kept children from starving. The fund was overseen by the village elders, chief among them a broad-shouldered, silver-tongued man named Benjamin, who had inherited his father's seat on the council, and with it, an appetite for comfort his father never had. Beside him worked Peter, the village treasurer, a thin, nervous man who kept the ledgers exactly the way Benjamin instructed him to. Nobody suspected them at first. Why would they? Benjamin smiled at every wedding, prayed loudly at every funeral, and gave generous-sounding speeches at every festival about unity and sacrifice. But over the 2 years before this story truly begins, the harvests in Colon had grown thinner and thinner in the storehouse, even as the rains stayed generous and the fields stayed full. Families whispered about it at the well. Old Samuel, the one honest elder left on the council, a widower with tired eyes and a stubborn conscience, raised the question twice in meetings, and was twice told, smoothly, that hungry rats and poor irrigation were to blame. He did not believe it. He simply had no proof. Mary, meanwhile, was hearing things no one intended for her to hear. Sent often to deliver pots to the elder's compound, she would sit quietly mending a cracked handle, while Benjamin and Peter spoke freely nearby, certain the silent potter's daughter was no more dangerous than the furniture. "Move another 20 sacks before the festival," she once watched Peter murmur. "If the count comes up short again, people will ask questions." Benjamin only laughed and said people always asked questions and never found answers, because the poor are too tired to look, and the loud ones are too busy being loud. Mary kept mending, her face calm, her hands steady, while inside her something cold and clear began to settle. She did not yet understand the whole shape of it, but she understood enough to know something was very wrong, and that she was perhaps the only person in Colon who knew it. It was David who first noticed the change in her. "You've been making strange figures lately," he said one evening, turning one of her newest pieces over in his palm, a small hut with a false wall and a shape hidden behind it. Mary only looked at him and pressed a finger to her lips, though she needed no reminder to stay silent. David did not laugh at the figure or set it aside as a plaything. He turned it over again, frowning, and asked quietly, "Is this about the grain, Mary? Is this about the elders?" She did not nod. She did not need to. The steadiness in her gaze told him everything, and from that evening on, David became her second pair of eyes in a village that refused to look closely at its own leaders. The harvest festival arrived that year with its usual noise and color, drums echoing from the square, the smell of roasted yam and palm oil drifting over the roofs, children weaving between the stalls and borrowed beads. It was, Benjamin liked to say every year, a celebration of Colon's abundance, though few people paused to ask why that abundance never seemed to reach the poorest homes first. Thomas had been asked to deliver a large order of ceremonial pots to the elders' compound before the evening feast. And as always, it was Mary who carried them, balanced carefully on a woven tray against her hip, weaving through the crowded paths toward Benjamin's grand red clay house at the edge of the village. She found the side door unlatched, the compound unusually quiet, most of the household already gathered at the festival grounds. Setting the tray down carefully, she noticed a narrow passage behind the kitchen she had never been permitted to enter, its entrance half hidden by a curtain of woven reeds. Curiosity, or perhaps something sharper and more purposeful than curiosity, pulled her forward. Behind the curtain, a low chamber opened into the earth, cool and dim, and there, stacked from floor to ceiling in neat, deliberate rows, sat more sacks of grain than she had ever seen in one place in her life. Grain that Peter's ledgers claimed did not exist. Grain that hungry families 2 streets away were being told the village simply did not have. Her breath caught. Her hands, usually so steady at the potter's wheel, trembled around the small clay pouch she always carried, the one holding her tools and a few unfinished figures. She did not know how long she stood there, frozen between fury and fear, before she heard the footsteps, unhurried and confident, coming down the passage toward her. Mary pressed herself into the shadow beside the tallest stack of sacks, her lantern shielded against her chest, her heart slamming so loudly she was certain it would betray her. 2 shadows stretched long across the chamber floor, and she recognized the voices before she saw the faces. Benjamin, low and satisfied, and Peter, thin and anxious as always. "The count will hold until after the festival," Peter was saying. No one checks the storehouse during the celebrations. Benjamin's laugh was soft and terrible. No one ever checks anything in this village, Peter. That is the beauty of being trusted. They lingered only a moment longer, adjusting something near the entrance, before turning and walking back the way they came. Never once glancing toward the shadow where a girl with no voice stood, memorizing every sack, every shelf, every detail of the room that could ruin them. Mary did not move for a long time after their footsteps faded. When she finally slipped from the chamber and out into the cool evening air, she stood beneath the wide arch of stars scattered across the sky, and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she now carried the truth of her village inside her chest, like a burning coal, and that no one would ever believe her simply saying so, because she could not say anything at all. She thought of Samuel's tired, questioning eyes at the last council meeting. She thought of the hungry children at the well. She thought of her father's gentle hands teaching her to shape clay, and of the language he had unknowingly given her, one that had no need of a voice. That night, sleepless on her mat, Mary reached for a fresh lump of clay and began to work, her small hands moving with a purpose they had never carried before. If words would not serve her, she decided, then pictures would. If no one would listen to a mute girl's accusation, then perhaps they would follow a trail they did not even realize they were following, one small clay scene at a time, until the truth stood so plainly before them that denial became impossible. Over the following days, Mary began leaving her figures where the right eyes might find them. A tiny hut with a hidden chamber behind a false wall, left where the women gathered at the well. A row of grain sacks beside two miniature men in the fine robes only elders wore, left near the meeting hall. A hungry child with an empty bowl, placed beside a fat, smiling official holding far too much. She worked mostly by night, terrified someone would recognize her hand in it, equally terrified no one would notice at all. Will anyone even understand this? She wondered, staring at her work with sudden doubt. Or will they simply see broken toys? It was David who first connected the pieces, turning one figure after another over in his hands with growing unease, until he brought two of them, wordless and urgent, to old Samuel's door. Samuel, who had never fully believed the excuses about rats and irrigation, studied the tiny hidden chamber and the row of grain sacks for a long moment in silence, his weathered face darkening. "Where did these come from?" he asked, and David, hesitating only briefly out of loyalty to his friend, told him. Samuel did not laugh, and he did not dismiss it as a child's imagination, because he had spent 2 years quietly noticing the same gaps the figures now seemed to describe. Together, the old elder and the young fisherman's son followed the trail Mary had laid, piecing together clue after clue, each leading them closer to Benjamin's compound, until finally, with a handful of tired villagers behind them, they arrived at the very passage Mary had once trembled inside. They pulled back the curtain of woven reeds and found exactly what her figures had promised. Sack upon sack of grain that should never have existed. Benjamin arrived moments later, his easy smile faltering the instant he saw the crowd gathered around his secret. "This is a misunderstanding," he began smoothly. But Samuel simply held up two small clay figures, side by side, a fat official and a hungry child, and asked whether Benjamin cared to explain the misunderstanding to the empty bowls and half the homes of Colon. Peter's nerve broke long before Benjamin's did, and once his ledgers were pulled from hiding and compared against the grain in the chamber, the truth stood too plainly for either man to talk his way around. Villagers who had once trusted Benjamin's warm smile now saw only the cold arithmetic of what he had taken from them. Within days, both men were stripped of their positions and driven from the council, while the recovered grain was measured out fairly among every family that had gone without. It was Samuel who stood before the whole village at the gathering that followed, Mary's small clay figures lined up on a table before him, and it was Samuel who spoke the words Colon would repeat for years afterward. "We believed," he said slowly, "that leadership required the loudest voice in the room. We were wrong. Justice came from the quietest, from a girl this village mistook for powerless, because she had eyes willing to see what others refused to notice, and hands patient enough to shape the truth until we could no longer look away." That was the moral the village learned that day. Courage does not always announce itself with sound, and silence, when paired with honesty, can speak louder than any voice raised in a crowded room. Mary did not smile easily even then, simply because it was not her way. Yet when the villagers lifted her onto their shoulders and carried her through the square, chanting a name they had rarely bothered to use with warmth before, something in her chest loosened that had been tight since the day she was born. Her father wept openly, gripping her hand as though he might never let it go, and her mother whispered that she had always known her silent daughter carried something extraordinary inside her. David walked beside her the whole way, grinning, holding up one of her figures like a trophy for the village to see. In the seasons that followed, Mary kept shaping clay, though her work took on a new purpose. Children began bringing her their worries and small secrets, trusting her steady hands and steadier silence more than most grown voices in the village. And slowly, she became something like Colon's quiet conscience, the keeper of a language built entirely from patience and truth. She never found her voice the way the village once hoped, and by the end, no one seemed to mind, because they had learned through her that a voice was never really the point. The truth simply needed someone brave enough to shape it, and someone honest enough to follow the trail. If Mary's story reminded you that the quietest person in the room can sometimes be the bravest, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs that reminder today. And thank you, truly, for spending this time with me, and with the daughter of the Clay Village.